In a quiet little neighborhood, nestled between rolling hills and tall oak trees, life moved at a comfortable pace. The streets were lined with neat rows of houses, each one painted in soft pastels or earthy tones. Front yards boasted vibrant, flower beds, trimmed hedges, and perfectly mowed lawns that seemed to stretch endlessly under the warm afternoon sun. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes down winding paths, dogs wagged their tails lazily on porches, and neighbors exchanged friendly waves as they watered their plants or took out the trash. Among these residents was Alex, a hardworking, single parent who had recently moved into the area with their 2 children. After years of renting cramped apartments in bustling cities, Alex saw this suburban haven as an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to build a stable, peaceful life for their family. They spent weekends unpacking boxes, painting walls, and planting flowers in the front garden. Slowly but surely, their house began to feel like home. At first glance, everything about the neighborhood seemed idyllic. People greeted each other warmly at mailboxes, shared recipes during summer barbecues, and organized block parties to celebrate holidays. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect community lurked tensions that weren't immediately visible to newcomers like Alex. One name, in particular, came up often in hushed conversations among neighbors: Karen. Karen was the self-appointed leader of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a group responsible for enforcing rules designed to maintain the aesthetic appeal and harmony of the neighborhood. At least that's what the official brochure said. In reality, Karen treated the HOA less like a governing body and more like her personal kingdom, wielding its bylaws like a weapon against anyone she deemed unworthy of. Living there, her reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered stories of how she once demanded someone repaint their front door because it clashed with the color scheme of the street. Another tale described how she reported a family to the HOA for leaving their Christmas lights up until February, claiming it detracted from the visual cohesion of the development. Even small infractions, like failing to edge your driveway properly or letting weeds grow in your flower bed, could land you in Karen's crosshairs. Despite hearing these rumors, Alex tried not to let them bother them too much. They figured, if they kept their property tidy and followed the rules, they wouldn't have any issues. Besides, moving to a new town wasn't easy, especially with 2 young kids adjusting to a new school. The last thing Alex needed was unnecessary drama. So they focused on making their house and their lives as pleasant as possible, but avoiding trouble proved harder than expected. From the moment they arrived, Karen made it clear she had opinions about nearly everything Alex did. When Alex installed a bird feeder in their backyard, Karen sent a note reminding them that feeders could attract squirrels, which might dig holes in pristine lawns. When Alex parked their car on the street overnight instead of in the driveway, Karen left another note saying it violated subdivision guidelines. And when Alex accidentally missed garbage day because they were running late for work, Karen called the HOA office to report the oversight. Still, none of this compared to the obsession Karen developed over Alex's lawn. You see, Alex had always taken pride in their yard. Back in the city, they'd transformed a tiny patch of concrete into a lush oasis filled with potted plants and hanging baskets. Now, with an entire front lawn to care for, they threw themselves into creating something truly spectacular. Every blade of grass was meticulously trimmed, every flower bed carefully arranged, and every sprinkler nozzle adjusted for optimal coverage. By spring, Alex's yard was the envy of the entire block, and that's exactly what set Karen off. To Karen, perfection wasn't just admirable, it was threatening. Her own yard, while perfectly acceptable by most standards, suddenly seemed dull and uninspired next to Alex's verdant masterpiece. She began scrutinizing every detail, looking for flaws she could exploit. When she couldn't find any, she resorted to nitpicking instead. First came the complaints about watering times. Too early in the morning, she claimed, disturbing her sleep. Then came accusations of using too much water, despite Alex adhering strictly to local conservation guidelines. Finally, she filed a formal grievance with the HOA board, alleging that Alex's sprinklers were causing runoff onto public sidewalks. Alex was baffled. They hadn't done anything wrong, Yet Karen's relentless criticism felt like a personal attack. Determined to avoid conflict, they adjusted their sprinkler schedule and reduced water usage even further, hoping to appease her. But no matter what they did, Karen remained unsatisfied. Her disapproval simmered beneath the surface, festering into something far more dangerous: resentment. What Alex didn't realize was that Karen wasn't just annoyed, she was envious. Envious of their beautiful lawn, envious of the admiration it garnered from other neighbors, and envious of the peace and happiness radiating from their household. To Karen, Alex represented everything she wanted but couldn't achieve through sheer force of will alone. And as days turned into weeks, her jealousy grew darker, sharper, until it consumed her entirely. Little did Alex know, Karen's growing animosity would soon spiral out of control, culminating in an act so reckless it would change the neighborhood forever. For now, though, life continued as usual, or so it seemed. Behind closed doors, tempers flared, alliances shifted, and secrets festered, all while the calm facade of suburban bliss remained intact. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form, threatening to shatter the fragile harmony of the community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across manicured lawns, Alex sat on their porch sipping tea and watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Unaware of the storm brewing just around the corner, they reflected on how lucky they were to call this place home. If only they knew what was coming. Alex's lawn had become the talk of the neighborhood. Every morning as the sun rose and bathed the street in golden light, neighbors couldn't help but notice how lush and vibrant it looked. The grass was a deep shade of green, soft to the touch, and perfectly even, as though someone had taken a ruler to it. Flower beds burst with color, pops of yellow marigolds, velvety red roses, and delicate lavender sprigs framed the edges of the yard like an artist's masterpiece. Even the shrubs were trimmed into neat geometric shapes that seemed almost too perfect to be real. It wasn't just Alex who put effort into their property. It was clear they took pride in every detail. Their sprinkler system ran like clockwork, delivering just the right amount of water at just the right time to keep everything thriving. It was no wonder people stopped to admire it or slowed down while driving past. Kids from nearby houses often asked if they could play on the soft grass, and even delivery drivers paused for a moment to take in the sight before heading off to their next stop. But there was one person who didn't share this admiration: Karen. To her, Alex's lawn wasn't a source of beauty or inspiration, it was a threat. A constant reminder that someone else's hard work and dedication could outshine her own. Her own yard, while well-maintained, lacked the same sparkle. Sure, she followed all the HOA rules religiously, planting approved flowers and keeping her hedges pruned within an inch of their lives. But something about Alex's approach felt effortless, like they weren't trying nearly as hard as Karen did, yet still managed to create something extraordinary. Karen's irritation started small, almost imperceptible at first. She'd glance out her window each morning, pretending to sip coffee, while secretly sizing up Alex's progress. At first, she convinced herself it was harmless curiosity, just checking to make sure they weren't breaking any rules. But soon those glances turned into scowls, and her mind began spinning with reasons why Alex's lawn shouldn't exist in its current form. The first complaint came in the form of a note slipped under Alex's door. Written in Karen's precise handwriting, it read, "Dear neighbor, I've noticed your sprinklers run very early in the morning. While I understand the importance of watering lawns, the sound is quite disruptive to my sleep. Could you please adjust your schedule? Thank Anaine. You." Alex sighed when they found the note. They knew Karen was difficult, but this felt petty, even for her. Still, they didn't want to cause trouble, so they adjusted the timer on their sprinklers to start 10 minutes later. Problem solved? Or so they thought. But Karen wasn't satisfied. Within days, another note appeared, this time complaining about excessive watering. According to Karen, the runoff from Alex's sprinklers was pooling near the curb, which violated subdivision guidelines. Alex double-checked their setup and found nothing amiss. Their sprinklers were calibrated, to minimize waste, and the runoff issue Karen described simply didn't exist. Nevertheless, they tweaked the system again, slightly reducing the water flow to avoid further conflict. Karen, however, smelled blood in the water. Seeing Alex back down emboldened her, fueling her belief that she held some kind of power over them. She began documenting every alleged infraction, snapping photos of damp patches on the sidewalk or stray drops clinging to blades of grass. Each photo was accompanied by a detailed email to the HOA board, complete with time-stamped evidence and references to obscure sections of the association's rulebook. Her campaign escalated quickly. One evening, as Alex was tucking their kids into bed, they received a formal letter from the HOA notifying them of a hearing regarding water usage violations. Shocked and confused, Alex reread the document several times, trying to make sense of the accusations. How could something as simple as watering their lawn land them in hot water? Determined to defend themselves, Alex attended the meeting, armed with facts. They brought charts showing their water consumption, well within recommended limits, testimonials from gardening experts attesting to the efficiency of their sprinkler system, and even weather reports proving recent rainfall had reduced their need for irrigation. When it was their turn to speak, they calmly presented their case, pointing out inconsistencies in Karen's claims and asking for clarification on vague terms like excessive and runoff. For a brief moment, it seemed like reason might prevail. Several board members nodded in agreement, impressed by Alex's thorough preparation. But then Karen stood up, her voice trembling with indignation. She launched into a dramatic speech about community standards, environmental responsibility, and the importance of maintaining harmony among neighbors. Her words dripped with emotion, painting Alex as someone who cared only about themselves and not the greater good of the neighborhood. The room fell silent as Karen finished speaking. Alex wanted to respond, to point out the hypocrisy in her argument, but decided against it. Something told them this battle wouldn't be won with logic alone. Instead, they quietly promised to review their sprinkler settings one more time and ensure compliance with HOA guidelines. The board accepted this compromise, dismissing the case without issuing penalties. On the surface, it appeared Alex had dodged a bullet, but inside, frustration bubbled. They hadn't done anything wrong, yet they were being forced to change things that didn't need fixing. All because Karen couldn't handle losing the spotlight. What stung most was the knowledge that Karen wouldn't stop here. This victory, hollow as it was, would only embolden her further. And Alex was right. Over the following weeks, Karen's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She parked her car across the street from Alex's house, staring at their yard through binoculars as if searching for new ammunition. She interrogated other neighbors, fishing for gossip about Alex's supposed misdeeds. And late at night, when everyone else was asleep, she paced her living room, muttering to herself about fairness and justice. Unbeknownst to Alex, Karen's jealousy had reached a boiling point. No longer content with passive-aggressive notes or bureaucratic complaints, she began plotting something far more drastic. In her mind, Alex's lawn represented everything she despised: success without struggle, admiration without effort, happiness without compromise. If she couldn't have the best yard on the block, then nobody could. What Karen failed to consider, however, was the potential fallout from her actions. Revenge is a dangerous game, especially when driven by unchecked emotions. As she formulated her plan, oblivious to the consequences it might unleash, the neighborhood remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. For now, life continued as usual, with residents going about their daily routines and enjoying the last lingering days of summer. But cracks were beginning to show, not just in Karen's fragile ego, but in the fabric of the community itself. Trust eroded bit by bit, replaced by suspicion and resentment, and as dusk settled over the quiet streets, casting long shadows across manicured lawns, no one suspected that the worst was yet to come. The night air was cool and still, with only the faint hum of crickets breaking the silence. Most of the neighborhood had turned in for the evening, their houses dark except for the occasional glow of a porch light or the flicker of a TV through living room windows. It was the kind of quiet that made it easy to believe nothing could go wrong, until Karen decided to act. Karen had spent hours pacing her home, replaying every interaction she'd ever had with Alex in her mind. Each memory fueled her resentment, twisting it into something darker and more volatile. She couldn't shake the image of Alex's perfect lawn, gleaming under the morning sun like some kind of taunt. The HOA board's dismissal of her complaint earlier in the week felt like a personal insult, as though they were siding with Alex against her. She told herself this wasn't about jealousy, it was about justice, about fairness, about setting an example for the rest of the neighborhood. If Alex thought they could flaunt their so-called perfection without consequences, then Karen would show them otherwise. And if a little chaos erupted along the way, well, sometimes sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. With determination hardening her features, Karen grabbed a flashlight, a wrench, and a pair of gloves from her garage. Dressed in all black to blend into the shadows, she slipped out of her house and crept down the street toward Alex's property. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from excitement. This was her moment, her chance to take back control. As she approached Alex's yard, Karen paused to listen for any signs of movement. The sprinklers weren't running at this hour, which meant no one would hear water hissing through pipes or notice anything unusual until it was too late. Satisfied that the coast was clear, she ducked behind a row of bushes lining the driveway and crouched low, scanning the area once more before making her move. Her target was the main sprinkler valve, box near the side of the house. It wasn't locked, a fact Karen noted with smug satisfaction, and it took only moments to pry it open with the edge of her wrench. Inside, a tangle of pipes and valves connected the sprinkler system to the main water line. To most people, it would have looked complicated, even intimidating, but Karen had done her research. Over the past few days, she'd watched online tutorials and memorized diagrams, learning exactly how these systems worked and how to sabotage them. Working quickly, she loosened several key valves, ensuring water would flow freely instead of being directed where it belonged. Then, using the wrench, she adjusted the pressure regulator, increasing the force of the water output far beyond what the system was designed to handle. Finally, she rerouted one of the feeder lines, angling it slightly upward so that when the sprinklers activated, the water would shoot outward rather than downward. Every twist of the wrench brought a surge of satisfaction. In her mind, she imagined the look on Alex's face when they realized their precious lawn was ruined. Perhaps they'd blame themselves at first, thinking they'd accidentally misconfigured the system. Or maybe they'd suspect foul play but lack the evidence to prove it. Either way, Karen relished the thought of watching them squirm. When she finished tampering with the sprinklers, she stepped back to admire her handiwork. Everything appeared normal on the surface. The valve box closed securely, the grass undisturbed, but beneath the ground, disaster lurked. With a satisfied smirk, Karen slipped away, disappearing into the darkness as silently as she'd arrived. By sunrise, the effects of Karen's sabotage were impossible to ignore. The sprinklers didn't activate immediately. Modern systems were programmed to conserve energy by delaying startup until optimal times, but when they finally kicked on around 6 and 11 a.m., chaos erupted almost instantly. Instead of delivering gentle sprays of water evenly across Alex's lawn, the sprinklers unleashed torrents of water with alarming intensity. Streams shot high into the air, drenching nearby trees and soaking the exterior walls of the house. Water pooled rapidly in low-lying areas, turning flower beds into muddy swamps and flooding sections of the driveway. Within minutes, the entire front yard resembled a shallow pond. But the damage didn't stop there. Thanks to Karen's modifications, the excess water surged beyond Alex's property line, spilling onto the sidewalk and cascading down the sloped street. Gravity did the rest, carrying the deluge downhill and spreading it across multiple neighboring yards. Lawns became saturated, driveways turned into rivers, and cars parked curbside began to float like boats. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, woke up to find her prized azaleas submerged under several inches of water. Across the street, Mr. Patel stepped outside to investigate the sound of rushing water, only to discover his basement flooded and his cat perched precariously on top of a floating ottoman. Children who normally played in the cul-de-sac now splashed, around in knee-deep puddles, laughing at first but growing uneasy as the water continued to rise. Panic spread quickly as residents realized the scope of the problem. Phones rang non-stop as neighbors called each other to share updates or accusations. Some assumed a water main must have burst somewhere, while others speculated about faulty infrastructure or freak weather conditions. No one suspected foul play, least of all Alex, who stumbled out of their house in pajamas and rubber boots, staring in disbelief at the watery mess surrounding them. What happened?" Alex muttered, shaking their head. They rushed to shut off the sprinklers, but the damage was already done. Water gushed uncontrollably from broken pipes and misaligned valves, refusing to stop despite their frantic efforts. Desperate for answers, they called a plumber, who arrived within the hour to assess the situation. "It looks like someone tampered with your system," the plumber said after inspecting the valve box. "These valves are completely loose and the pressure regulator's been cranked way too high. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, or at least tried to." Alex's stomach sank. Tampering. That word hit them like a punch to the gut. Who would do such a thing? And why? Meanwhile, Karen watched the unfolding drama from behind her curtains, pretending to sip coffee as she observed the pandemonium. Outside. At first, she felt a thrill of triumph, imagining how embarrassed Alex must feel. Surely everyone would turn on them now, blaming their negligence for the disaster. But as the hours passed and the floodwaters spread farther than she'd anticipated, doubt began to creep in. She hadn't planned for this level of destruction. In her mind, the sabotage was supposed to ruin Alex's lawn and embarrass them, not devastate half the neighborhood. Yet here she was, witnessing families wade through flooded streets and emergency crews struggle to contain the overflow. Guilt nibbled at the edges of her conscience, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself that Alex deserved whatever came their way. Still, Karen couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things might spiral out of control. What if someone found out what she'd done? What if her carefully constructed alibi fell apart under scrutiny? For now, though, she remained silent, watching and waiting as the community grappled with the aftermath of her reckless actions. Little did Karen know her secret wouldn't stay buried for long. Hidden cameras installed by tech-savvy neighbors captured glimpses of her sneaking around in the dead of night. Clues left behind, a misplaced glove, tire tracks leading away from Alex's driveway, would eventually piece together a damning picture. And when the truth came to light, Karen's world would come crashing down just as spectacularly as the sprinklers she'd sabotaged. For now, however, the neighborhood remained oblivious, united only in its shared frustration and confusion. As waterlogged residents gathered in soggy clusters to compare stories and speculate about causes, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Accusations flew, tempers flared, and trust eroded faster than the soil washed away by the flood. Amidst the chaos, Alex stood frozen, wondering how their dream home had turned into a nightmare and who, if anyone, they could truly trust. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Neighbors gathered in clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves as they tried to make sense of the disaster that had unfolded overnight. Some wore rain boots and carried buckets while others stood ankle-deep in water, shaking their heads in disbelief. The flood had transformed what was once a picturesque cul-de-sac into something resembling a swamp, complete with floating debris and muddy rivulets snaking through yards. Alex stood in the middle of it all, feeling both overwhelmed and utterly alone. Their once pristine lawn was now a soggy mess, dotted with drowned flowers and scattered mulch. Water still trickled from broken pipes despite Alex's best efforts to shut off the system earlier that morning. Every time someone passed by, they shot Alex a look, some sympathetic, others accusatory. Whispers drifted on the humid air, snippets of conversations pieced together in Alex's mind. Must have been watering too much again. Didn't Karen warn them about this? I heard the HOA fined them last month. Each comment felt like another weight pressing down on Alex's shoulders. They hadn't done anything wrong, at least not intentionally, but the evidence pointed squarely at them. Broken sprinklers, flooded streets, ruined property. How could anyone believe they weren't responsible? Even Alex struggled to understand what had happened, though deep down they knew they couldn't have caused such widespread damage on their own. Karen, meanwhile, played her part perfectly. She moved among the crowd, offering condolences and advice, her tone dripping with feigned concern. "Oh dear, I can't imagine what went wrong," she said to one neighbor, clutching her chest dramatically. To another, she added, "It's such a shame. It really is. Maybe we should revisit those HOA guidelines on irrigation systems." Her words were carefully chosen, planting seeds of doubt without directly accusing Alex. Her performance was flawless, but there was an edge to her demeanor, a glint in her eye that betrayed her satisfaction. Beneath her polished exterior, Karen reveled in the chaos. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Alex humiliated, their reputation tarnished, and the entire neighborhood questioning their competence. It was almost poetic, she thought, sipping coffee as she watched people scramble to clean up the mess. But not everyone bought into Karen's act. Jamie, a tech-savvy neighbor who lived 2 doors down, noticed something odd about the situation. Jamie wasn't particularly close to Alex. In fact, they barely exchanged pleasantries, but they prided themselves on being observant. Over the years, Jamie had installed security cameras around their property, citing rising crime rates in nearby areas as justification. Now, those cameras might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. Jamie approached Alex cautiously, sensing their distress. "Hey, sorry about all this," Jamie began, gesturing toward the flooded street. "Looks like you're getting hit pretty hard." Alex forced a weak smile. "Yeah, no kidding, I don't even know where to start." "Well, maybe I can help," Jamie offered. "I've got cameras set up outside my house. If whoever, or whatever, caused this came anywhere near your place, I might have caught it on film." For the first time that day, Alex felt a flicker of hope. "You'd do that?" "Sure," Jamie replied with a shrug. "We're neighbors, right? Besides, if someone messed with your sprinklers, they probably didn't think twice about breaking rules. That affects all of us." With nothing left to lose, Alex followed Jamie back to their house. Inside, Jamie fired up a laptop and pulled up footage from the previous night. Grainy black and white images filled the screen, showing shadows moving across the darkened street. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just trees swaying in the breeze and the occasional car driving by. But then, something caught Jamie's attention. There! Jamie pointed to a figure darting between houses, partially obscured by bushes. They rewound the clip and zoomed in, revealing a person dressed in dark clothing, carrying what appeared to be tools. The figure paused near Alex's driveway, crouched low, and tinkered with something before disappearing into the night. "That's near my sprinkler box," Alex said, their voice trembling. "Do you think it's possible?" Jamie interrupted, narrowing their eyes. "Whoever this is, they clearly didn't want to be seen. And look at the timing. They showed up just hours before everything went haywire." The realization hit Alex like a ton of bricks. Someone had sabotaged their sprinklers deliberately. But who? And why? Word spread quickly about the surveillance footage. By mid-afternoon, a small group of neighbors had gathered at Jamie's house to watch the video and discuss next steps. Emotions ran high, with some demanding answers and others urging caution. Karen positioned herself at the center of the debate, steering the conversation toward accountability. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she declared, folding her arms. "If someone tampered with Alex's sprinklers, we deserve to know who and why. This isn't just about one person's yard anymore. It's about our entire community." Her words earned murmurs of agreement, but Alex noticed the way Karen avoided making direct eye contact during the discussion. There was something off about her demeanor, a subtle shift in her usual confidence. Was she nervous? Guilty even? Determined to uncover the truth, Alex suggested holding an emergency HOA meeting. Normally, these gatherings were dull affairs reserved for discussing paint colors and parking regulations. This time, however, tension simmered beneath the surface as residents filed into the community center, eager for answers. The room buzzed with chatter as everyone took their seats. When the meeting finally began, Alex stood up to address the crowd. Their hands shook slightly, but their voice remained steady. "I know a lot of you are upset, and rightfully so. My sprinklers caused this mess, but I didn't do it on purpose. Someone tampered with my system, and thanks to Jamie's cameras, we might be able to figure out who." A murmur rippled through the audience as Jamie queued up the footage on a projector screen. The grainy image of the shadowy figure reappeared, prompting gasps and whispers. People leaned forward in their chairs, straining to identify the culprit. Karen sat stiffly in the front row, her expression unreadable. As the video played, her fingers drummed anxiously against her knees. When the figure bent over the sprinkler box, she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone around her. When the clip ended, silence fell over the room. Everyone turned to Alex, waiting for them to name names. But Alex hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Before they could speak, Karen cleared her throat loudly, drawing attention to herself. "This is troubling," she said, standing up. "Very troubling indeed. Clearly someone went to great lengths to cause this damage. But let's not jump to conclusions. This footage could have been edited or manipulated. We need concrete proof before pointing fingers." Her statement drew mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Jamie, however, wasn't willing to let her deflect suspicion so easily. "Actually," Jamie interjected, stepping forward, "the cameras record automatically and upload footage to the cloud. There's no way to alter them without access to my account, which only I have. Unless you're suggesting I staged this whole thing." The room erupted in murmurs again as Karen faltered. For a moment she looked cornered, her mask slipping ever so slightly. Then, recovering her composure, she shot back, "I'm just saying we should be cautious. False accusations will only divide us further." Her defensiveness raised more eyebrows than reassurances. Sensing an opportunity, Jamie pressed on. "If you're so concerned about false accusations, maybe you'd like to explain why your car was parked near Alex's house late last night? According to my footage, it matches the timeline perfectly." Karen froze, her face pale. "That's ridiculous," she stammered. "My car was in my garage all night. You must be mistaken." But Jamie wasn't finished. With a few clicks, they pulled up additional footage showing Karen's car pulling away from Alex's driveway, shortly after the figure disappeared. The license plate was clearly visible, leaving no room for denial. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Karen. For the first time, her confident facade crumbled completely. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she sank back into her chair, defeated, as murmurs of shock and anger filled the air. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. Karen's jealousy and obsession had spiraled out of control, culminating in an act of sabotage that hurt not just Alex but the entire neighborhood. What started as a petty rivalry had escalated into something far more destructive, and now there was no escaping the consequences. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Neighbors exchanged stunned glances, their faces shifting from disbelief to anger as the weight of Karen's actions sank in. For years, she had been the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's rules and aesthetics, enforcing guidelines with an iron fist while portraying herself as a pillar of integrity. Now her carefully constructed facade lay shattered, exposed by undeniable evidence that left no room for excuses. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her cheeks flushed red with shame, or perhaps rage. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing coherent came out. Instead, she clutched the edges of her seat, knuckles white, as if bracing for the storm about to break over her head. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before someone finally spoke. "This is unbelievable," muttered Mr. Patel, breaking the tension. "All this time we thought Alex was at fault, and now we find out you did it?" His voice carried a mix of betrayal and disgust, echoing the sentiments of everyone present. Slowly, others began chiming in, their questions sharp and accusatory. "Why would you do something so reckless?" asked Mrs. Thompson, her usually soft tone edged with anger. "You've ruined people's homes, all because of some silly rivalry. Over grass?" It wasn't just about the lawn, Jamie interjected, addressing the crowd. This goes deeper than that. Karen has always needed to feel in control, even if it meant stepping on others to get there. This flooding? It's not an accident, it's retaliation. Karen shot Jamie a venomous glare but said nothing. She knew better than to argue. The footage spoke for itself. Still, she couldn't resist attempting one last defense. Standing. Abruptly, she straightened her posture and cleared her throat, trying to summon some semblance of authority. I admit I made a mistake, she began, her voice trembling. But I never intended for things to escalate like this. I only wanted to teach Alex a lesson, to show them they can't flaunt their perfection without consequences. Her explanation fell flat. If anything, it made her sound more unhinged than remorseful. A low murmur rippled through the room as neighbors exchanged skeptical looks. A lesson? Someone scoffed. You call destroying half the neighborhood a lesson? Alex, who had remained quiet throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. Their expression was calm, though their eyes betrayed a simmering frustration. Karen, they said evenly, what you did wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. People could have been hurt. Homes are damaged, cars are totaled. Do you even realize how much trouble you've caused? Karen flinched at the directness of Alex's words, but quickly masked it with indignation. Oh, please, she snapped, her composure slipping further. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing, parading around with your perfect lawn, rubbing it in everyone's faces. That's not true, Alex countered, raising their voice slightly. I worked hard on my yard because it's important to me. Because having a nice home makes life better. For me, for my kids, for the neighborhood. But none of that mattered to you, did it? You couldn't stand seeing someone else succeed, so you decided to tear them down instead. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Even those who hadn't been fond of Alex before found themselves sympathizing with them now. Karen's behavior seemed petty and vindictive, especially compared to Alex's genuine efforts to contribute positively to the community. As the meeting dragged on, tempers flared and accusations flew. Some neighbors demanded Karen resign from the HOA immediately, arguing that she was unfit to hold any position of authority. Others suggested legal action, pointing out that her sabotage had caused thousands of dollars in property damage. Amidst the chaos, Karen retreated to the back of the room, visibly shrinking under the weight of collective condemnation. By the end of the meeting, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Decisions were made. Karen would step down from her role as HOA president, effective immediately. A temporary board would take over until new leadership could be elected. Additionally, several residents filed formal complaints against her, seeking compensation for damages caused by the flood. Legal proceedings loomed on the horizon, promising to drag Karen deeper into the mess she'd created. For Alex, the aftermath brought a strange mix of relief and unease. On one hand, they were vindicated. The truth had come out, and their reputation was restored. On the other hand, the ordeal had taken its toll. Trust within the neighborhood had been fractured, and repairing it wouldn't happen overnight. Still, Alex resolved to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. In the days that followed, the community rallied together to clean up the wreckage. Volunteers armed with shovels, mops, and buckets descended upon affected properties, working tirelessly to pump out water, repair broken pipes, and salvage whatever belongings they could. Local businesses donated supplies, offering discounts on replacement furniture and landscaping services. Even children pitched in, helping to sweep mud off sidewalks and stack sandbags to prevent future flooding. Jamie proved to be an invaluable ally during this process. Not only had they uncovered the truth about Karen's sabotage, but they also spearheaded efforts to upgrade the neighborhood's infrastructure. Using their technical expertise, Jamie proposed installing smart irrigation systems that could detect leaks or unusual activity, a safeguard against similar incidents in the future. Several neighbors enthusiastically supported the idea, pooling resources to fund the project. Through it all, Alex found themselves growing closer to their neighbors. Conversations that once revolved around superficial pleasantries now delved into shared experiences and mutual struggles. Bonds strengthened as people worked side by side, united by a common goal, rebuilding their community stronger than ever. Karen, meanwhile, became a ghost in the neighborhood. She avoided public gatherings and kept her curtains drawn, emerging only when absolutely necessary. Rumors swirled about her impending move. Some claimed she'd already put her house on the market, while others speculated she was hiding indoors, too ashamed to face anyone. Whatever the truth, it was clear she'd lost her grip on the power she'd once wielded so ruthlessly. Despite everything, Alex refused to let bitterness consume them. They chose forgiveness, not for Karen's sake, but for their own peace of mind. Holding on to anger would only prolong the pain, keeping them tethered to a chapter they desperately wanted to close. Instead, they focused on nurturing the relationships they'd built and creating a brighter future for their family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over freshly repaired lawns, Alex stood on their porch and surveyed the scene. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind fertile soil ripe for renewal. Flowers planted weeks earlier were beginning to bloom, their vibrant colors signaling hope and resilience. Children laughed as they chased each other through sprinklers, newly installed ones this time, and neighbors chatted amiably across fences. It wasn't perfect. Scars from the flood remained etched into walls and driveways. But it was progress. Life in the neighborhood had changed irrevocably, yet in many ways it had improved. Gone was the suffocating atmosphere of judgment and control Karen had fostered. In its place stood a community bound by empathy, cooperation, and a renewed appreciation for the little things that made their corner of the world special. As Alex watched fireflies dance in the twilight, they allowed themselves a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it, with courage, determination, and the support of those around them. After all, storms may come and go, but it's the strength of roots that determines whether a tree stands tall or falls. And in this neighborhood, roots ran deep.